So not too long ago, I published a video about a very alarming and concerning farm attack that happened in South Africa. It was the attack on Rulay Ace, a cattle farmer from Carolina who was attacked and tortured with boiling water. And some part of the video I discussed the fact that especially the English-speaking media in South Africa have become complicit to the problem, in the sense that they hardly ever report on these farm attacks, and when they do so, their reporting is very ideologically skewed. Also in this video, I looked up some of the major and most influential news outlets in South Africa. I searched the name of Rulay Ace and I found that in virtually all of them, there was no coverage of this incident, even though it's something that should obviously be deemed newsworthy. So after that, I received an email from the editorial team at News24 who said that my remarks were a blatant lie, that News24 in South Africa does in fact report on farm murders, and presumably that their reporting on this issue is fair and balanced. And as a result, that the claim that through the way in which they report about farm attacks or violence on farms in South Africa, they are contributing to the crisis is a blatant lie. They went further by demanding that I issue some form of a public apology or a correction, explaining that what I gather from their email, that in fact their reporting is indeed fair and balanced. Now, what is quite remarkable about this email is that it also contains a claim that they have noted, that is the editorial team at News24, that there is a concerted campaign by certain individuals, including myself and other, I believe they said, social media influencers, to tarnish the reputation of News24. In other words, what I interpret from that is that they believe that to the extent that News24 is being increasingly criticized for their approach to the news, to reporting and so forth, that the criticisms aren't really valid because it's only a small group of people that are pushing certain dishonest narratives. Now this, of course, is very alarming, given that it is indeed the case that News24's reporting is something to be concerned about. That News24, and especially the editorial team at News24, are deeply ideological, and that the manner in which they approach the news is very, very much tainted by their ideological prescriptions. Now, but the problem goes deeper than News24. This is a much broader problem in South Africa because we see the same type of approach and reporting by institutions like the Daily Maverick and many others. There's a long list of these institutions. And so the editorial team at News24 sent me a list of news reports, links to news reports that they have published over the years, which they asked me to review in order to justify the necessity of a public apology or a public correction to the claim that their reporting isn't balanced and that they are contributing to the crisis. So I responded and I said to them that I will indeed go through all of these articles and I will respond appropriately. But the problem, as I said, goes much deeper than News24. And I have some examples here. Recently, a journalist from one of the biggest news outlets in South Africa, a prominent TV network, spoke in studio in the United States about the situation in South Africa and very publicly denied the existence of race laws in South Africa, claiming that there are no race laws in South Africa. There are news outlets in South Africa who claim to report on the news objectively, who are funded by the Open Society Foundation, George Soros, and so forth. And this is not some conspiracy. It's published on their financial statements, their reporting, their website, and so forth. And so they would like us to believe that they report in a fair and a balanced way, even though they are funded by institutions that have a very, very explicit ideological pursuit. There are certain well-known tropes in South Africa that are reported over and over and over again, even though it is blatantly false. One of these examples is the claim that in South Africa, white people own 80% of the land. If you look it up, you will find so many references to this claim that white people own 80% of this land, even though there's no source for it and it's blatantly false. The South African government alone owns and controls about a quarter of land in South Africa. And most of land is owned by trusts and companies and so forth. But this lie has been repeated so many times and amplified so many times that a lot of people just accept it at face value, which again indicates that there is a very serious problem in the media in South Africa. When Julius Malema testified in court during the Kill the Boer case, he testified under oath that he might one day call for the slaughtering of white people. He might one day, and these were his words under oath in court, he might one day call for a genocide to happen in South Africa. There were journalists and news outlets in court that day who did not report on him saying this, who reported on him and his performance in court as having had a great performance, he did well politically and so forth. Now think about just how dangerous this is. One of the most influential politicians in the country goes into a courtroom, testifies under oath that he might one day call for a particular racial group or ethnic group to be exterminated, and it's ignored by the media. Not just is it ignored, they publish videos and reports about his greatest moments in court and so forth. There is another very alarming phenomenon in South Africa that has to do with the way in which particularly mainstream media outlets report on incidents of racism and also incidents of violence where there are where the perpetrator and the victim are of different races. Where, for example, when the victim is white and the perpetrator is black, oftentimes you would find that it's not reported. And this is not just some claim, we have research to back this up. And when it's the other way around, not only will it be reported on, it will explicitly be labeled as an act of racism or evidence of white racism and so forth. There's also an alarming phenomenon in the media in South Africa where the race of the perpetrator or the race of the victim is explicitly pointed out when the perpetrator is white and when the victim is black. But you would never find that racial dynamics are pointed out when the dynamics are the other way around. And through these type of small editorial decisions, a distorted narrative is being created in South Africa, and especially a distorted narrative about farmers and white farmers in South Africa. There are a lot of people who truly believe in this brutal farmer stereotype because this stereotype has been created by the media in South Africa. This is not to say that there aren't isolated incidents where a farmer does something atrocious or something that should be condemned. But what we see happening is that these isolated incidents, which really only happens rarely compared to the bigger crime phenomenon, especially of farm attacks, that these incidents are highlighted and repeatedly reported on to such an extent that people start to think that that is the reality in South Africa. And now, perhaps even worse, there is a particular narrative in South Africa in terms of racial dynamics based on certain claims about history. Now, in South Africa today, especially in the media world, it has gotten to the point where you can say absolutely anything you want about how evil and atrocious white people have been historically. It doesn't matter if the claim is true or not, as long as it reflects or as long as it falls in line with the narrative that white people are evil oppressors and black people are by definition victims. You can say it. And if you speak contrary to this narrative, regardless of whether it's factual or well documented, you would be condemned and criticized for that. And one of the most bizarre examples I've seen, for example, was in a television interview I did several years ago in studio. A TV news anchor said to me that to be a black person in South Africa today is just as bad as being a Jew in a Nazi concentration camp. Now, the claim is so outlandish that it's laughable. But the problem is that there is this completely disconnected echo chamber. An echo chamber among media elites, some academic elites, some political elites, that is completely disconnected from reality. But it's a self-reinforcing echo chamber where they say these things to each other and they applaud each other for saying this. And they believe it to be true and they believe it to be the neutral position. And so that is why at Lex Libertas we have decided to do something about this. We are starting a media watchdog or a media watch, which will be partly an initiative of Lex Libertas and partly an initiative of the Lex Libertas Club. And what I mean by that is that Lex Libertas is a think tank and an advocacy group, but it is still very new. It's only a few months old and we are still growing. We don't yet have the capacity to appoint a list of researchers on a full-time basis. But there is a lot that we can do with our limited capacity. We would, however, need to expand our capacity to do this in a way that is thorough as it ought to be done. And in that sense, obviously, I would like to encourage you to sign up to be a Lex Libertas contributor to enable us to do this on a much more comprehensive scale. But other than that, we are going to use the Lex Libertas Club to help us with that. The Lex Libertas Club is a platform through which our contributors can become involved as volunteers. Now, we do know that we have some highly skilled and highly educated contributors who are very well at doing research and so forth, and who have also indicated to us that they would like to help on a volunteer basis where they can. And so we are going to have a meeting with our contributors soon to discuss how we are going to roll out this Media Watch initiative of Lex Libertas. The idea is to publish reports, to spread information throughout various platforms about the extent of media bias in South Africa, about distorted narratives, about distorting the truth, about ignoring to report on certain issues while repeatedly reporting on other issues, about writing repeated editorial columns that provide a particular ideological framework, oftentimes at the expense of the truth. And now the challenge for us is that this would have to be a very well researched and credible initiative. And the challenge is, of course, when you work with volunteers to help, there would have to be some form of quality control. But I'm convinced that it is possible to start an initiative like this with some people doing research on a more dedicated basis and people also contributing as volunteers, in other words, through citizen journalism, in a way that will be credible, that will be factual, and that will really contribute and help to bring balance to the very distorted narratives we have in South Africa, pushed, unfortunately, by elites in the media. And so, if you want to become a part of this, we really would like you to become part. I'm going to be involved with this, especially, and we need to get researchers on board, some researchers whom we might contract to do work, but we would especially need volunteers. So I'm going to put a link to a form in the description of this video and in the first comment of this video. And if you are interested in helping, I would like to encourage you to click on the link to fill out the form, and our liaison officer, Pieter Ben Roos, will reach out to you to talk about how we can do this to make sure that you get the invitation to the online meeting where we are going to discuss how we are going to roll this out. If you are already a contributor to Lex Libertas, or if you have filled out the form already, you don't need to do so again. We will reach out to you in any case. Thank you very much, and I look forward to working with you on this exciting new initiative.